Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob, and one of the pastors. We have people who watch us from hundreds of locations every single weekend, and I'm grateful for them because they're hanging with us through this crazy season. Would you give it up and welcome them? And we just love having y'all watch us and be a part of things. So there are two kinds of people in this world when it comes to reading and following the directions. There are people who, when they open the box, the first thing they do is they grab for the instructions. Some of us are so uptight because we don't want to violate the directions and we don't want to take any chances at all. We almost never do anything without first reading the instructions. I happen to be one of those people. I'm also married to one, which kind of works, I guess, in some ways. And you know what I'm talking about if you can identify with me. You automatically grab for the instructions. It's like when you get a box of Raisin Bran, so you grab the box and you read the directions, carefully open the package and try not to spill the contents, pour cereal into a small or medium bowl, depending on your personal desires, add sweetener to taste, milk and cream, and enjoy. That's what it says right there. So, just read the instructions. And by the way, it's probably an aging thing, but who decides how small to make the print on these instructions? It just absolutely, anyway, blows my mind. Now, the rest of you, if you're not like me, you're like my brother. He wonders, so why do companies even waste the money to print instructions? What a big waste, he says. Never reads the instructions. Printed directions or going to a YouTube video or anything like that, purely last resorts. Every now and then I'll say to him, I think we ought to check the directions. I got this. That's what he'll say. Y'all know him, don't you? I got this. No worries. Famous last words. There have been plenty of times when, we should have done it. So I wonder sometimes, how do we come from the same parents? Do y'all ever think about that, like a brother or sister? All right, quick survey. Raise your hands. How many of you are like me? You just read the instructions. You just don't want to take any chances. Well, I'm glad to see you. Now, does that mean the rest of you are? So raise your hand. I want you to keep them up just a second. If you don't ever think about instructions, raise your hands. So okay, look around, y'all, because these are the people that like to put things together 2 or 3 times. That's exactly right. Now, for me, my solution was years ago, now I'm not making this up now, I was able to, we have our very own Christmas elf. I'm not talking about an elf on the shelf or anything imaginary like that. My elf, he will text me, usually it's the first week of December, text me from the North Pole, and he wants to know, he calls it elf help. He says, do you need some elf help? The most infamous Christmas of all was 2016. We were surprising our grandson with some type of basketball gaming system, and it was seriously complicated. I didn't even touch the box. I wasn't even about to open the box. Now, our adult elf also has 2 sons, and they are adults now, grew up in this church, and they both are engineering grads from North Carolina State University. In fact, right here is one. Now, there were about 300 pieces to this basketball contraption. All right, now look at this young man right here. That guy's got like a master's degree in engineering. And look how confused he looks. But for those of you who don't read the instructions, you see what he's doing, don't you? He's already grabbed for the instructions. He's a young man after my own heart. Now, so 2016, Christmas Day worked like a charm. And I didn't have to lose anything, if you get my drift. Now, for those of you who are assembly challenged, when I tell you this story, you're going to say, man, I wish I lived on your street. We have some dudes that live on our street, and they also double as pretty awesome neighbors. But around our house, we affectionately call these guys the We Can Fix Anything team. My next door neighbor, whose name is Chris, when he sees a repair truck in my driveway, he just cringes, calls me right away and says, how much you paying that guy? Because he can fix anything. And he never wonders, he always wonders, why didn't we call? Here, my guys. Now, they were over just this week because over Christmas when my grandson, he's 11, and he's always throwing balls and stuff, and we got this nice little lamp or something like that over the garage, and he threw a ball up there and busted it out. So they were over this week, and they were, that's Chris and Byron, and every now and then Justin will show up, but those dudes right there are absolutely amazing. So whenever Susan can't fix something, she just calls them. And that's the way it works at our house. Look, this is true too. In the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel, the great King David, y'all have heard of him? Well, he surrounded himself with 37 guys, and he called them his mighty men. Let me tell you, David's got nothing on me. I got 3, but they are mighty men. Chris, Byron, and Justin. Amazing dudes, no question about it. So, it's really not a big deal when it comes to a Christmas gift for a grandchild, or, sometimes if my gas grill won't turn on or something like that, Chris will be over in 2 minutes and he's got it going. But when it comes to your marriage or your career, maybe your finances, it could be your relationship with your children, your business partners, those of you who work in the same department, and maybe sometimes there's a little bit of an edge. You don't want to, you don't trudge very far without saying, what was I thinking? For example, your friends told you the relationship was not good, but you wouldn't listen. I mean, they tried to input some info, and then you said, what was I thinking? The ad said, 0 down, no payments until January 2022, and then, what was I thinking? You decided to join a fraternity or sorority against the wishes and wisdom of your parents because they were already a little suspect about some of your study habits, but you were not afraid of a few extra distractions. What do your parents know after all? But then your second semester sophomore year, you got a notice from the university you're on academic probation, and now you're saying, what was I thinking? They said it was the deal of a lifetime, and it was. What was I thinking? You just carelessly sent 25 business emails from your personal account. Whoops, and what was I thinking? You had dinner out with some friends, and y'all decided to have dessert. It was about 9:30. You thought you ordered decaf. It wasn't. 3:15 in the morning, you're still staring at the ceiling thinking, what was I thinking? If you're an NFL fan right now during the playoffs, let me tell you what, you don't want to see your favorite player with this kind of expression. No, sir. Like, what was I thinking? Quite frankly, what was I thinking is a good question. I love it that we sometimes have to ask the question. But the bigger challenge, you know what the bigger challenge is? We never answer it. That'll get you in some big trouble. You know why we never answer the question? Because we are convinced that what was I thinking will give us experience, and experience will make us wise. Experience does not just automatically give you wisdom. Now, it will make you age faster. It can wreck your finances. It can make you angry. It can increase your loneliness. Sometimes it can destroy a relationship. But experience doesn't automatically give you wisdom. This will. Evaluated experience. That will make you wiser. Experience has the potential to increase your wisdom quotient, but only when you learn from it. That's why Solomon says in Proverbs 4, get wisdom, develop good judgment. Don't turn your back on wisdom, for wisdom will protect you. So whatever you do, get wisdom. The other lie we sometimes tell ourselves is that if we know better, we'll do better. That's not true. One of my seminary professors, this has been 40-some years ago, and he would say, guys, when y'all get out of school and y'all get a church somewhere, most of the people in your church, they know what they ought to do. The problem is that many of them don't do it. And I get that, and so do you. Some of you have said to a teenager, don't do what your friends do. You got to think about some things. You think about some things before you just go plunging down the road toward destruction. And what does every teenager say? I know. Mom, Dad, I know. And the assumption behind those words is what? Because I know, I would automatically do better than my friends. And teenagers sometimes have to find out the hard way that they can't see far enough down the road of life, the road of experience, to begin to understand that every decision has a consequence to it. Could be because they find guidance from those of us who are adults, and we haven't figured out that every decision we make has a consequence. That's why Solomon writes, once again, this is Proverbs 14, he says, the wise are cautious and avoid danger. Fools, on the other hand, just plunge ahead with reckless confidence. Let me tell you something. If we think the way we used to think, we will probably do the things that we used to do. So if I were challenged to put this entire sermon in one sentence, I think I would say that God wants our next time to be better than our last time. Let's see if we can get our hearts around that one today. Many of you believe that you just need to make better decisions and then your life would be better. Just would automatically happen. But here's what we need to grab hold of today. Most of our decisions, listen carefully, get filtered through the way we look at the world. Most of the decisions that we make go through our priorities and values that give guidance to our life. But God knows that if He can help us to think better, then our decisions can be better. And then hopefully next time can be better than our last time. It's all about rebooting how we think and what we think about. Today I'm going to turn our attention to a really short passage, even though I quote this all the time. I haven't gone back to check. I'll bet you that I quote this maybe about once a month or so. But today we're going to seriously put this, it's just a couple of verses, but we're going to put it under the magnifying glass because I want us all to get it this time. We need to really get it. This passage was written by a man named Paul. He was a first century follower of Jesus. And for the first part of his life, I'll talk about that in a minute, but later in life, he traveled all across the known world, mostly in the Roman Empire. He established somewhere between 15 and 20 churches, also in the empire. Now, he would go to cities and villages and communities, and you got to remember now that in the Roman Empire, these people were politically and socially anti-Jesus. And before Paul was a great Christian missionary and the most successful church planter in history, before he ever preached even his first sermon, he seriously needed a reboot in his life. In the first half of Paul's life, he despised the name of Jesus. Everything about the Jesus movement just made him cringe. He was convinced that Christianity was a serious threat to the purity of his Jewish heritage and that Jesus and the movement needed to be silenced and destroyed forever. So he used a lot of his resentment and animosity toward Jesus to stop the spread of Christianity and to do whatever he had to do to these first generation believers. And as a result, in many ways, the whole Christian movement was up for grabs. It had not yet gotten a foothold so that it could become a worldwide pandemic type of faith-based. How would I say that? What would you call it? Not a religion, but a foundation, a faith foundation. Have you ever heard somebody say, some things never change? Watch this. That was 2,000 years ago. There are people all across this community right now who they would probably celebrate if the voice of the local churches in Burlington, North Carolina, and in our surrounding communities were shut down once and for all. There are plenty of people. Some are driving up and down St. Mark's Church Road right now, and they don't trust us at all. They don't believe or support what we do. And these voices are loud, and unless you've been living under a rock, these voices are getting louder every day. And what they're saying is, you people who follow this guy Jesus, you're intolerant, you're narrow-minded, you're exclusive, and you're on the wrong side of history. They believe that our virtues and values are outdated and that they should be forever erased from the American culture. There's a view that's spreading across our land these days that they believe that Jesus is an extremist And there's no place for him in this progressive American culture. These anti-Jesus attitudes. Now, if we just limit what we do to this little square piece of property on planet Earth, 1230 St. Mark's Church Road, they don't care if what we do just stays right here. But they don't want us to be spreading what they consider to be a non-inclusive ideology any further than the boundaries of this property. Now, I understand that a Christian worldview in our day is almost extinct in America. About 9% of Americans still hang on to a Christian worldview. Now watch this. This is scary. 2% of young Americans in their 20s still hang on to a Christian worldview. So what is a Christian worldview? It's pretty simple. That we believe that absolute truth does exist, that we cannot earn our way to heaven, that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, and that the Bible contains practical advice for life. Now, you think about it, 2% of our 20-somethings are still able to wrap their hands around, and their brains around, their hearts around this. The more popular worldviews these days, you've heard of secularism, postmodern is a worldview, and there are a growing number of people who are holding on to a Marxist worldview, which is basically the rejection of God in favor of an economic solution over a moral solution. Now, if you're checking us out for the first time today, maybe on the recommendation of a friend, or it could be that it was just a New Year's resolution and you thought you're going to bounce around to a few churches in this new year and see if you can find a place where you can land, we're glad you're here. And I hope that if you'll hang around a while, then maybe you'll feel like that we can sync up together. But here's what we want you to do. If you're new here, and all of you really, but if you're new, hey, hold our feet to the fire. We want you to do that. You should expect us to be long on authenticity and short on hypocrisy. But now, if you expect perfection, this place is not going to work for you. I mean, we're going to disappoint you because we mess up. Actually, we mess up with some regularity, but we love being held accountable for the ways in which we love Jesus. We want to be more like him. That's a part of our mission. So thank you for giving us a little piece of your 2021 so that we maybe can shine some light on the real Jesus. Maybe this sermon will help you. This guy, Paul, he was devoted to slowing up, really stopping the momentum of the early church because he believed that Christianity was dangerous and the teaching was going nowhere fast. Now remember, the Jesus movement is barely in its third decade. Paul is banking on the fact that if the anti-Jesus people could put enough pressure on these new believers that they would eventually cry uncle, give up their passions for Jesus, and pretty soon the Jesus movement would just die a slow death and would eventually disappear. But then we get to the book of Acts chapter 9. Paul is on the road. He's on a road trip, and he's going to Damascus, which is about 80 miles north of Israel, and he's going there to try to round up some Christian believers, and he's going there to see what he can do because he's heard that there was a fairly substantial Christian community in Damascus. So he's going there, and he's going to try to start shutting down any movement that could be going in that direction. It's a counterfeit message, he believes, and Jesus was an imposter. But on the road to Damascus, on the way there, and you read about this in Acts chapter 9, Paul has this personal encounter with God, and the results are that it radically changes the trajectory and the devotion of his life. In fact, it is going to change his direction forever. To say that God rebooted Paul, his passions and priorities, would be a great understatement. And the results were that Paul did a 180-degree pivot. He goes from being a public enemy number one of Jesus to becoming the greatest voice for Jesus in Christian history. Instead of being a nasty antagonist of the first century church, Paul becomes the most passionate voice and fearless defender of the Jesus movement in the first century. Now, some of you, when I read these verses in a moment, you're going to say, Bob, man, you read that all the time. You quote from those. That's true. Some of you may even have it memorized. Others of you would say, when I read this, you're going to say, well, I never knew the Bible was as practical and applicable as this. It's one of the reasons why we're forever talking about read the book. I mean, read the book. It's crammed full of real world information that can make your life and mine better. Romans chapter 12. This passage was written to a group of Jesus followers who were living in the city of Rome, Italy. This was written about 57 AD. Now, so we're only talking 30 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. I would not be exaggerating to say that if you lived in Rome in the first century, there was so much anti-Christian bias there that it was not even safe. So here's Paul writing to the Christians in Rome, trying to encourage them, and here's what he says. Look at these words. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters," that's simply a way of saying, I'm talking to those of you who have already devoted your life to Christ. "Dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you." So he's almost like he's on his knees. He's begging to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them, he's talking about, let your body be a living and holy sacrifice. What does that mean, a living sacrifice? Because for a couple of thousand years, these people had been making dead sacrifices. Animal sacrifices were so popular in those days. Don't copy, that word means conform. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform. That word is the word where we get our English word metamorphosis. That's a radical change. Let God radically change how you think about things so that he can change you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you. In other words, then you'll know what God would have you do, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Now, for the first 11 chapters in the book of Romans, Paul is saying that there was a time when we were all rebellious. Yes? Yes, okay. I mean, I know it's hard to say, oh yeah, I was rebellious. There was a time when we were rebellious. We were living in rebellion against God. We were running in the opposite direction from God, but God loved us way too much to allow us to stay handcuffed to our own self-destructive decisions. So in Romans 5, Paul says, God showed how much he loved us by having Christ die for us, even though we were still sinners. Don't you ever let somebody talk you into believing that you need to clean your act up before you come to Jesus. A long time before we ever thought about Jesus, he had already died for us. God sent his own son on a search and rescue mission to start breaking down the wall of sin that had separated us so that we could be reconciled to God and have our relationship restored that was busted in Genesis chapter 3 back in the days of creation. There was a time when all of us were saying, hey, my life is about me. It's my life. My life is about my choices, my preferences, my priorities and desires. I do what I want to do when I want to do it and with whomever I choose to do it. There was a time when we all lived this kind of a self-centered, egocentric, greed-infested, self-indulgent life. But then, when we finally came to understand, when God changed the way we were thinking about things, and we started looking at the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, many of us made a decision that, hey, we're going to do what we can to align our life, our plans, our priorities, and our purposes with that of God. And so we started to let go of some of those selfish and pompous plans and arrogance. Back to Romans 12:2. Watch this. This is going to be super practical. Paul says, don't copy the behaviors of the world. Don't be shaped by the world. Don't live the way the world lives. Stop imitating the opinions of the culture around you. Don't be shaped by the world. Don't become a carbon copy of everything that you see other people doing. And some of you have no idea what a carbon copy is. But you know, when you're doing an email and you see the little CC thing on there, that's what it means. Back in our day, there were really copies, but that's a whole different thing. One translation says that we should not allow the world to squeeze us into its mold so that we just fit into the way of the world. We tell our teenagers all the time, you don't have to be like everybody else. You can be your own person. And this teenager's thinking, but I like what everybody else likes. And so do we. Y'all know what these are? These are cookie cutters. Pretty popular around the kitchen. They can be a lot of fun because all of your cookies come out exactly the same. They all look, that's a good catch. They all look, I played first base. I mean, you already knew that though, didn't you? So, I mean, I'm an old baseball player. You still play a little baseball, but anyway, that's a whole different thing. You got me distracted. Okay, cookie cutters. It's like an assembly line. You know, you just pop them out. Works great when you're making cookies for a birthday party. But it doesn't do well when it's a lifestyle. Paul says, do not be shaped by the world. Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Paul uses that word transformed. Don't be conformed. It's not like this. It's like this. Transformer. It's being transformed into something brand new. You change the way you think, eventually you can change your behavior, your choices, and your priorities will change. Let me illustrate that. And I hope you will hear the sensitivity of this illustration. Last summer, when our nation found itself entangled with with a new struggle for racial justice and equality. And it was time. It was appropriate that we would start to reconsider what our values and priorities are in regards to equality issues and how some of those attitudes have been tarnished and biased by some old attitudes. I don't know if you remember this or not. I'm not a great NASCAR fan, the professional racing group, but I do pay attention to it a little bit. But back last summer, when I first heard that NASCAR had banned the Confederate flag from all of their events. Now, I totally supported that decision, thought it was a great decision. But my first thought was, it's probably not going to make a difference. Let me explain that spiritually. I'm not interested in debating you over the Confederate flag or anything of the kind, because I know some people believe that it's a symbol of racism. Other people believe, no, it's a symbol of our heritage, and be that as it may. At least we know that the flag does represent some kind of divide that's going on in our land. Now, the person who wants to take a Confederate flag to a NASCAR event or put a flag on their vehicle or maybe even in their front yard, they're making a statement, and it's not up to me to judge what kind of statement they're making. I understand that. But is there anybody who really believes that by telling somebody you can't bring the flag to a NASCAR event is going to change the way they think about it? Most likely, what you're going to have is a guy sitting in a NASCAR event, and now he's frustrated and really ticked off. But nothing has changed. He hasn't changed the way he is thinking about that, so the chances of a heart change are probably close to zero. I hope that makes sense. Paul says, let God transform the way you think. And hopefully then, we will eventually be able to translate our new way of thinking into some attitudes and decisions that we make going forward. What he's saying is, our marriage, family, kids, businesses, jobs and careers, our relationships, they're not going to look, those of us who follow Jesus, ours are not going to look like everybody else's. We're not going to be a bunch of cookie cutter people without distinction. When we allow God's word and God's truth to influence how we think, there's a greater chance that those new thoughts will allow us to make better personal decisions and ultimately maybe some lifestyle changes. Isn't that really what a New Year's resolution is all about? It's just thousands of people across our land, and what they're saying is, I'm going to double and triple my effort, and I'm going to make some lifestyle changes, and then by the time summer comes or the weather breaks in the spring, I'm going to be a new person. I'm going to have some new values and priorities and habits, and you'll see the new me. But if this person doesn't allow God to change how they think about those habits, then their life change is probably going to be a long shot. You think that maybe is the reason why only 8% of New Year's resolutions make it to the summer? That's because it's not about willpower. It's about allowing the Spirit of God to start modifying how we think about things, values, priorities, behaviors, and habits. But now some of you are asking $1 million question right now in your brain. So exactly how is God going to go about changing how I think about things? Because quite frankly, Bob, I've got my mind made up. Good question. It's about putting off the old stuff because the old stuff failed anyway. Every time, and putting on something new. I'll illustrate that for you. You don't need to raise your hands because I don't want to feel sorry for you, but how many of you have ever tried to refinish a piece of furniture? God help you. You know, because if you don't have help, then you're probably going to lose your whatever faith you have. Now, I actually thought about that once. There was this table, and I thought, you know, and then I reasoned and I thought, you know, Bob, you're a pastor, for crying out loud. If you start trying to refinish that table, you're going to lose any professional and personal integrity that you've ever gained. So I watched a YouTube video on how to strip off the old stuff, and there were chemicals and rubber gloves and, you know, miles of sandpaper and a whole bunch of elbow grease. You know, you watch those videos, it looks pretty simple, doesn't it? Now, what Paul is talking about is if you want to reshape if you want to reshape your thinking, you're going to have to strip off some old stuff. You're going to have to strip away some of those spiritual strongholds that have held us captive, like foolish and reckless decisions. Come on, we've all got some of those. Selfishness, greed, and pride, and I could keep going. Almost sounds like it's just a matter of elbow grease, doesn't it? No. But God loves you way too much. So some people want to know, well, why doesn't God just step in and just magically make things different? Well, I mean, what sense would that make? You can live the way you want to, the way you lived last year if you want to. Lots of people do that. Year before that. So God says, it's going to take me a while, but I'm going to start peeling off some of that. We around here, we call it stinking thinking. Y'all know about that? Stinking thinking. I'm going to peel some of that stinking thinking off because it's not going anywhere anyway. And I'm going to start to put back on a new purpose and a new vision for your future. But you know what the big challenge is? Now, I know some of you are going to roll your eyes when I say this. In the same way that old kitchen table is not likely to be finished in 1 or 2 days, God typically doesn't just magically just strip off all the old stuff in a day or two. Life very seldom pivots in a brand new direction in 1 or 2 days. We have to change, we have to allow God to change the way we think, and then eventually the plans and purposes that God has built in us can begin to change. But it starts with rebooting our thinking. Then you can start to reformat the way you do your life. So he says, let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will be able to know what God wants for you. So how does God do that? How does God strip off the old and put on the new? Last Sunday after church, before I got home, it was 12:45. I hadn't even gotten home from church yet. I had a text message from a guy. Here's what he said. Oh my gosh, Bob, today was a change point in my life. I heard something today for the first time. But watch. And he said, and I almost didn't come. How many of you would say that there were times when you were sitting in this room in a church sanctuary or an auditorium or this worship center, or maybe for those of you who typically watch us online, you're gathering around a television or a computer at home. Maybe you were attending a study group or maybe a community group. How many times have you said, that's the first time I've heard that? Wow, I get it. See, you never know when God is going to show up and is going to have something that he purposefully carved out just for you. I guarantee you, just about every person in this room and all of you watching at home, you've had the experience of sitting in a service, not necessarily in this church, but you've been in a church service, and it's like, I think I'm the only person in here. It's like God was just reaching right into your world. It was not about a skilled, qualified communicator. That was the Spirit of God starting to break through some of that old stuff, peeling it off. And you know how it is when you wake up on a Sunday morning and you look outside and you say, oh man, it's a cold drizzle, January. And then you say, nah, not today. And you either pull the covers up or go get another cup of coffee. But look, we've already taken all that from you, hadn't we? I mean, this online stuff and all, I mean, you eliminated just about every excuse. But when you put yourself in a position so that God can change your thinking, strip off the old stuff, then he can begin to build back in some of those irresistible, compelling values that we all long for. The second way that, and we've talked about this already, the second way that this happens is with when you are involved in a group. Now, this is a pretty large group here, but when you're involved in a smaller group. I just counted up this week. The video was, and Jarm talked about this, but we got, I said community groups, home groups, small groups, study groups, common interest groups, support groups, recovery groups, and there are probably some that I haven't thought of. You know why those are so effective? Because everybody has a front row seat. And we get to learn from the people around us. People's experience starts leaking over into our journey. I call it life on life. When people get together in small circles, life on life. You get to go to school on somebody else. Why do you want to go down every dead-end road and bust your life into 1,000 pieces? I mean, find out what this guy did when he messed up his world. You get a better perspective. Somebody can say, yeah, I tried that road. It was full of potholes. That was a dead end. And see, all the time, what's God doing? He's peeling off some of that old stuff. And he's helping you to rethink your plans and priorities. That's when your next time can be better than your last time. So what was the question in this sermon? What was I thinking? I'm going to give you a series. This is going to be practical, and then you can go see if you can put this into practice. So I'm going to give you several what was I thinking subjects, and then you got to figure out the answer. If you're in a community group or a home group or something like this, this would make a great discussion in the next coming week. So you ready for this? You ready? No, you're not ready for this. I'm just going to tell you up front, no, you're not ready for this. But it's written in the script, so I got to go with it. Except for those people who are watching online, because they can always go, oh, and click me off. Number one, you ready? Watch. If I find the right person, everything will be right. That's such a lie. That is such a lie. If you've ever had a relationship and watched it go belly up, I'll bet you there was a time when you were saying, man, this relationship is so perfect. And then maybe there were lies and deception and dishonesty, and now you're saying, what was I thinking? Number two, my situation is unique. Now, that's a lie. Now, you are unique, but your situation is probably not. When I got to St. Mark's Church, I was 25 years old, had dark hair, didn't know anything. Literally, didn't know anything. Nobody wanted my advice. I went years without ever having a counselor. Can you imagine somebody coming to me for counseling? I mean, that would have made no sense at all. But then I started having conversations, hundreds of them. And I started walking into people's hard and painful life moments. And I started to see life demands up close. And I remember asking a friend who's a trained therapist, Christian counselor therapist, and I said, kind of how many life situations are there? You know what he said? 5 or 6. So yours is probably not unique. There's more than likely somebody in this church who's already been down that road. At least there's probably 0 chance that you're going to experience something that someone else has not experienced before you. But it's changing your stinking thinking. And then God can use that to change behavior. Number 3, I bet you I've heard this 200 times, maybe more than that. Somebody will say, hey, look, Bob, I know it's not right, but it makes me happy, and I know that God wants me to be happy. Sometimes when people say that to me, it takes all the restraint I've got to not lose my pastor credibility and say something that I ought not say. Usually I want to say, hey, look, I'm not against your happiness. Now, even though happiness is momentary and is seriously overrated, but I want to say to people, happiness is not in the Bible. God doesn't have a priority for your happiness. But I try to restrain myself, and I love to explain that really God's commitment is for us to experience, this word is joy. You know what that means? It means contentment. When you live with contentment, with the plans, the priorities, even the boundaries and margins of God, but they are not designed for your happiness. When somebody tells me, I know God wants me to be happy, what they're really saying is, God is okay if I go do the wrong thing and if I violate his plans for my life, so long as it leads to my happiness. That is so wrong. That would never happen. Is that enough? That's 3. I got some more. You want me to keep going? I got 3 more. You sure? Number 4, if I only had, you fill in the blank. If I only had a spouse, a different spouse. If I had kids or somebody else's kids. If I had a new job or a different boss, or if I could get a promotion, or if I had more money. And that's like saying, if you had a great dinner last night, who has a really good dinner and says, man, that dinner was so good, I probably won't be hungry for a couple of weeks. Appetites don't work that way. Appetites are not satisfied because look, you got the new car. And for a month or 2, you were happy. And then it snowed. And you got that salty slush frozen on the underside of your car, and now you have to make a beeline over for the car wash because you wanted to get your happiness back. Y'all want me to keep going? Have y'all noticed, by the way, and this is just a pet peeve, and I hope I only say it this one time to get it off my chest. I've said it to Susan 20 times, I reckon, in that, so I'm going to say it publicly, and then I try not to say it anymore. Have y'all noticed those commercials of those automobile commercials in the winter snow, and they picture this car or this truck, and it's got showroom shine, and it's going through the snow, but the grime never sticks to the car? Have y'all seen those? I'm going to get me one of those cars someday. I am. That's the last time I'll say that. But here's the point. No matter what you're hungry for, appetites are never satisfied. Number 5. Oh, man. I owe is better than I want. That's a huge lie. But I want it so badly, but then I'll owe. But you don't understand how much I want it. But I don't want to owe. But I should have what I want, so now I'm going to settle for owing. So you decide, look, I don't want to owe. So I'm going to take this new thing back to where I got it, and I want to ask for a refund. And what are they going to tell you? They're going to say, are you kidding? I mean, our company just spent billions of dollars to create these ads where the snow doesn't stick to the underside of a new car, so you would want one, and then you would feel okay about owing us, and so we're not going to take it back. Hey, look, I'm not against new cars or new furniture or new wardrobe or, if you get a cell phone every time a new version comes out. But I would really rather for you to learn how to live with a spirit of gratitude. But you know something? Wouldn't it be better if we just said, it's better to want than it is to owe? I don't know. Number 6. I got to let y'all. I need to stop doing this, don't I? Your secret is safe with me. That's a good one, isn't it? Nah. Secrets leak. They leak. Do you have a secret? Can I level with you? More than likely, either you've got to discard the secret or it's going to eventually damage a prized relationship. I'm not suggesting that you go get in the car in a few minutes and just blurt out everything, or those of you watching from home, take the family in another room and just pour everything out. But I am suggesting that you bring a secret out into the light. Secrets destroy things. They destroy marriages, careers, futures, and sometimes people's lives. And they need to be brought out into the light of God's love so they can eventually be eliminated. Here's the point. Paul says, don't let the world mold you and shape you into its pattern. You don't want to live a cookie cutter life and be like everybody else. Be transformed. Invite God to start changing the way you think. Give up some of those lies that aren't working for you or anybody else for that matter. And only then can you when God starts to reboot, can you pivot and start moving your life in a new direction so that the next time can be better than the last time. The lies we tell ourselves never work, not in the long run. So what do you say we give it up and let God transform how we think? And then maybe that will help us limit how many times we have to say, what was I thinking? We're here today. Listen, I want you to let the music team just kind of pour this song over you. It'll be worth it.